Hi guys, here we go again with the review of your third end of unit assessment, the participant as an individual. As with last time, you don't feel like you have to watch the whole video, skip through to the points where you really need to focus on what you might have missed marks on and how to improve your answers in certain sections. Overall, the questions on this paper were answered so much better than on previous assessments. So really well done to everybody for working on their exam technique. So well done. Right, here goes. Generally the multiple choice questions were answered really well. Most people scored 9 or 10, which was brilliant. A few people did get a question or two wrong. So one of them that a few people got wrong was this one, number 2. Which sport would an ectomorph be particularly suited to? Okay, so when you're answering these kind of questions about somatotypes, remember to look in the name of the somatotype. Here we've got a T, so we're talking about T equals tall and thin, which will help us to think about which sports they might be suited to. So a particularly thin person, not very well suited to a power sport like rugby. Same thing with tennis, they need good strength and power and good speed. 100 metres, again they need to be quite a muscular build in order to be successful at the 100 metres. Marathon running is a weight bearing activity. It's a long distance, which means it's ideal for people with a low body weight. So that's our answer. This question caught quite a few of you out. Disability categories. We did cover this. If you check through your notes, you should have it written down. But a few people selected temporary instead of the correct answer of social. So I was pleased that you identified that those two could be eliminated straight away. And then temporary, technically if you have an injury like a broken leg or you're in a wheelchair temporarily because of an injury, then you have a temporary disability. So that one can be crossed out and leave us with social as the correct answer. Another one that caught a few people out: which of the following is not a physiological factor that occurs with increasing age? So the key word here in the question is physiological. Physiological essentially means something to do with the body, so it means a physical factor. So if we look at down the list, things to do with the body, so injury definitely is to do with the body, flexibility to do with the joints in the body, stamina to do with the heart and lungs in the body. That leaves us with higher experience levels. Right, moving on to the short answer section of the paper, question 11. This question was answered pretty well by most people. A few people dropped 1 mark here or there. So looking at the question, using examples is something to really take note of. A couple of people dropped marks for not doing that particularly well. Then explain, so we're looking for some detail, the difference between competitive and recreational sport. So if you look in the mark scheme, there's a list of things that you could be given credit for. So here you have parts to do with competitive sport, about commitment, training, high levels of skill and fitness, the fact that it's taken seriously and it takes up time, and it's got to be organised in terms of the rules and when it takes place and where. Then down here, got the recreational side, so pretty much the opposite of the things up there. So here and here, it specifically says that you need to include examples, and down here, the maximum marks you can get if you don't give any examples is 3. So our first example answer is an excellent answer. In fact, it's too good really for the fact that it's only 4 marks. So the person starts off talking about competitive sport. They give an example, professional football, and then they talk about training. So that could have got a mark. High skills and abilities, again, could have got a mark. Physically demanding and time consuming. So could have actually, they mentioned 4 of the things that they only really needed to mention 1 of. Recreational sport then. So we've got a kick around at the park with friends. So we've got a social, an enjoyment, little skill or commitment. Not time consuming because it's done in their own time. So loads and loads of points from the mark scheme mentioned in that answer. So definitely well worth 4 marks. This second example, again, worth 4 marks. So absolutely nothing wrong with it, just slightly more. In fact, it's probably a better answer in terms of using time in the exam because it's more concise. So we've got skill, ability and technique. That picks up a mark. And then a good example here, competitive league tennis match organised by a club. Okay, then recreational sport, we've got social and enjoyment, and then they've used an example from the same sport but turned it around into a recreational example of just having a rally at the park with a friend. So really concise but accurate answer, 4 marks. This next answer is an example of one that just missed out, didn't quite pick up the 4 marks, so it picked up 3 marks out of 4. Okay, so if you look through the answer, I'll explain why that is. So we start off, competitive sport, play to win, so you can get a mark for that. There is an example, professional footballer playing for his club in a cup competition. Absolutely fine, so another mark there. Then when we move on to talk about recreational sport, play for the social side and for fun. Now that is on the mark scheme, however, it is just really saying the opposite of this point up here about playing to win. So it's almost repeating the point but just in reverse. So you can't get a mark for doing that. You'd have to mention a completely separate point. So it might be something to do with being less time consuming. That would pick up the 2nd mark. The example here, playing tennis in the park, absolutely fine, that picks up a mark. So 3 out of 4 because of that repetition of the same point, just the other way around. Okay, for most people this question was a really nice, easy 3 marks to pick up. The topic of somatotypes is one that I think you've all enjoyed and you've picked up the facts really well. So if we have a look at the first part, simply ask for a definition of somatotype. So the main thing I would hope you would pick up is this word physique, just because it's a little bit more advanced than something like body shape. You would still have got a mark for body shape, but it's quite a basic answer. You could have said body types, or you could have said something to do with how much muscle and fat, or you could have said structure of the body as well. Moving on to part B, specifically asks about an endomorph and an extreme endomorph. So we're looking at the extreme end of the scale and an example of a sporting activity. So at the top of this page you can see here I've drawn out the three somatotypes with the body shapes. So we've got the tall, thin ectomorph, we've got the dumpy endomorph, and the muscular mesomorph. So we're looking at endomorph. So 1 mark for talking about high percentage of body fat, or one of the other points mentioned there. And then the 2nd mark, a lot of people putting sumo wrestler, which is a very, very good example of an extreme endomorph. And then shot put, hammer thrower. A couple of people I think also said something about a prop in rugby, which is absolutely fine as well. Okay, answered well this question generally. So here's a really good example of an answer to this question. First part, somatotype, so we've got that word physique in there, and they've even gone so far as to name the 3 somatotypes, which is excellent practice. So definitely well worth the full mark on that one. Describing an endomorph in the second part. So we've got very fat, which picks up 1 mark, and then the example, sumo wrestling, second mark for 2. Perfect answer. This answer, however, only picked up 1 out of the 2. If you read through the answer, you hopefully see why. So in the question, it talks about an extreme endomorph, so the biggest, fattest endomorph. However, this person in their description has said quite fat. Okay, an extreme endomorph is not quite fat. They have a high, very high percentage of body fat. The example though of a prop is correct, so they pick up their 1 mark. So they just needed to be careful in the way that they worded the description of the endomorph. Another pretty nice question, this one, number 13. What is dehydration? And describe how a performer could avoid becoming dehydrated. So we've got a definition, the first part, rapid loss of water from the body. And then the second part of the question, regular drinks of water. So if you've mentioned before, during, after, that is going to make your mark even better, rather than just advising someone to take a massive amount of water on just at one time. So here's a really good example. Dehydration, excessive loss of body water, picks up that first mark for the definition, and then they've gone on to describe how to avoid it, and they've said about taking drink breaks whilst playing sport. So absolutely fine, picks up the 2 marks. Could have potentially also used the words before sport and after to make the answer even better, but still enough to pick up the 2 marks. Right, question 14 is a question about altitude. Generally, again, answered fairly well, this question. A few people picked up 1 mark instead of 2, so I'll try and explain in the next couple of slides why that might be. So if you look at the question, we know we're talking about altitude. So he trains in low altitude and then is playing his match at a high altitude. And we're talking about how it's going to affect his performance. So that's key. So the first mark, you've got to talk about oxygen. If you don't mention oxygen and how much oxygen is available, then you can't pick up that first mark. The second mark is to do with this bit here about performance. So you've got to talk about how that will actually affect him when he's playing in that football match. So something to do with his cardiovascular endurance, something to do with not being able to maintain a high level of performance, or not being able to keep up with play, or actually losing the match, or something similar. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. Right, firstly, a strong answer for this question. So this person started by mentioning the fact that David is used to training at low altitude, so he won't be used to what it's like at high altitude. They've then gone on to explain what it's like at high altitude, talking about the air being thinner and not as much oxygen being present. So picking up that first mark there. They've then talked about aerobic respiration, which is going to take longer to occur, and then the performance level is going to decrease or may have to stop. So easily picking up the 2 marks on that question. A good answer, that one. This answer only picked up 1 out of the 2. So if we have a look through, so it says David's performance would be affected by playing at high altitude, because unless used to it, playing at high altitude can cause sickness, headaches, dizziness. That is correct. However, it goes on to carry on talking about the effects. So this would affect his performance by making him unable to play at 100% or make sloppy passes and waste opportunities. So that is a very good, it's a clear explanation. So this part, explain how playing the match at high altitude could affect his performance. Yep, it is talking about that, but the key word that's missing is oxygen. So we don't actually know why this is happening. They've talked about what happens